Hi, I'm Quince. Welcome to the 12th and final entry in my series of reviews for Season 1 of the Playdate, Panic's handheld gaming console. Each week, for 12 weeks in a row, 2 brand new games from different developers appear like magic on your Playdate system. And now that journey is at an end, for me at least. For you, it's whenever you decide to buy a Playdate, if indeed that is a decision that you make. But for me, and for this video series, this is it. These are the final 2 games that come included with your system when you buy it. And Week 12's games are b360 and Ratcheteer. b360 was designed by Dan Messing and Stephen Frank, and it is Breakout in 360 degrees. That's it, that's the pitch. You now know exactly what the game is, and I don't think I need to clarify it much further, but I will. In b360, you control a starship that needs to bounce a force field to... You have a paddle that you rotate around the screen's edge using the crank, and you bounce a ball to break blocks. If you miss the ball, they give you a few safety bounces, then it disappears. And if you miss too many times, you have to restart. The game has a series of levels known as planets grouped together in galaxies. And each planet is its own cluster of blocks arranged in a unique pattern. Maybe something abstract, or maybe something familiar. Some blocks might take longer to break than others, some you can't break at all, but if you manage to break all the breakable blocks, you beat the level and move on. It's like that one game, Breakout, but in 360. This is the second week in a row that we've had a game that incorporates aspects of Breakout in some regard after last week's Battleship Gaudios, and you know what? I'm here for it. Tetris has had its time in the spotlight, it's Breakout's turn for some love. And in some ways, this sort of feels like the Tetris effect of Breakout games. Although not as flashy, it's got some really great music and kind of a Zen-like atmosphere. Unfortunately, that Zen-like atmosphere is quickly demolished by just how hard this game can be. At least for me. I don't know, maybe I'm just really bad at it personally, but I found it to be quite challenging. That challenge comes in positioning your paddle at the right angle to hit the ball where you want it to go, then to move the crank fast enough to hit it again on the other side of the screen or wherever it bounces to, which you may or may not be able to predict. I usually am not. You can also use the D-pad if you want instead of the crank, but I found that to be a little bit too slow, not quite as intuitive. After a while, I did start to get better at figuring out the angle I needed to hit it from, but that still tended to come after many failed attempts. Sometimes there's a real narrow crevice you need to aim for. I'm talking about some real Top Gun Maverick type stuff, and I would miraculously manage to make it in there only to die afterward before clearing out the rest of the level, which made it extra infuriating because of course my earlier success was just a fluke, and now I'm doomed to another dozen attempts before I can luck into that solution again. It's a lot of that kind of feeling. Later on, they do throw some things at you to mix it up. Sometimes the ball or paddle change sizes. Sometimes you've got 2 paddles, which makes coverage much easier. I liked that a lot. But man, oh man, did I bash my head against a lot of walls in this game, especially in the last couple of galaxies. Like, okay, there's this power-up that sometimes appears, which as far as I know doesn't have an official name, so I'm just going to refer to it as the Hell Square. What the Hell Square does is, after your paddle touches it, the next time you touch the ball, instead of the ball bouncing off, it sticks to the paddle as if it were the start of the level. Aha, you're thinking, the Hell Square is a good thing. This means you can take a breather and now aim the ball exactly where you want it to go. All praise the Hell Square! Except there's a problem. You see, the longer you bounce the ball in normal play, the slower it starts to move. And in later levels that I found extremely difficult, my only recourse was to hit this point, then very slowly and steadily keep the ball moving. Even if it took a long time, I was able to move to wherever the ball was to avoid letting it hit the edge because it was going at such a leisurely pace. All I needed to do was focus. Enter the hell square. As soon as I touch this thing, the ball is going to reset its momentum, start moving at top speed again, and inevitably, I'm going to lose it. I eventually learned to dread the hell square. Worse than any monster in any survival horror game, seeing that thing pop up on the screen made me shudder. And it's completely unpredictable. Sometimes I wouldn't see it appear for the entire run of a level. Sometimes in that same level, it would pop up every 10 seconds, as soon as I thought I had things under control, like it was intentionally antagonizing me. I could try to avoid it, but sooner or later, I would end up colliding with it as it rotates around the screen at a constant pace. I think that the developers intended the hell square to be a benefit, a helpful item, but I can't say for sure. Maybe they thought they needed to inject it whenever things started slowing down to keep the game from getting too boring. Maybe everybody at Panic headquarters is a pro with the crank and doesn't think this game is difficult at all, whereas I clearly consider it to be the Dark Souls of breakout games. All I know is I hate the hell square. Eventually, I discovered what I assume is a bug, or maybe it's intentional, who even knows anymore, that being, when you pause the game, everything on screen freezes except the hell square. Therefore, if timed correctly, I could pause, wait for the square to pass, then resume play every single time it came around on the screen. Yes, this was tedious. Yes, you may consider it cheating, but I did what had to be done to get by, and I have no regrets. Alright, that's the end of my rant portion of the video. Thank God when you get a game over, it just resets your score, but you only have to start from that level. You don't have to redo the entire galaxy again, or else I most likely never would have beaten this game. And beat it I did. I lost most of a weekend to it, frustrated and enthralled in equal measure. I just couldn't stop playing until I conquered it. Here's the congratulations screen to prove it. This is what I earned for my struggle. I honestly don't know whether I love b360 or hate b360. For all the time I spent groaning about it, I can't deny that it kept me playing. It was my singular focus until I managed to hit the finish line, and because I was so bad at it, it occupied me for several hours. One way or the other, I have passionate feelings about this game, which is not something I can say for every Playdate title. So for that reason, I'm considering it a success, even though it did bring me rage like I had never felt rage before. Okay then, let's try to calm down a little now because it's time to cover the final game of Season 1, which is Ratcheteer. Designed by Sean Inman, Ratcheteer is about an apprentice mechanic maintaining power plants and machinery in a post-apocalyptic world. It's an action-adventure game in the tradition of The Legend of Zelda, most closely resembling Link's Awakening on the Game Boy. Instead of a sword, you wield a wrench, but it kills enemies just the same. You can even spin the crank to do a 360 spin attack, and that also interacts with stuck machinery and other things in the environment in need of wrenching. Over the course of the game, you'll progress through multiple dungeons, expand your skill set with new items, fight bosses, solve puzzles, discover secrets, all that good stuff. Right off the bat, let me say I can understand why Panic decided to save Ratcheteer for the final game of Season 1. It may not be everyone's favorite game of the season, but it's almost certainly the longest, most polished, most fully featured title on the roster. I compared it to Link's Awakening before, and I mean that not just in terms of its graphics and gameplay style, but also in regard to its scope and quality of design. These are some really engaging, challenging dungeons with inventive puzzles and creative bosses. I don't make comparisons to Zelda lightly. I think that's maybe the best video game series ever created, and yes, Ratcheteer is certainly derivative of the Zelda formula to some extent, but I think it's more than capable of standing alongside it in terms of the quality of its design. And there are definitely a few things thrown in there that deviate from what you're expecting. Not the least of which is the story. There's some really interesting lore to discover. I love the world that was created for this game. Okay, I'm really front-loading this one with some strong praise, I know, but there are a few downsides. You carry 2 items at a time which you can switch between freely, otherwise you have to go to the menu to swap out different ones. Because of the Playdate's limited buttons, you get to the menu by holding down the B button, and then you navigate with the D-pad to pick items or look at the map. It's a little clunky, and early on it's easy to fumble with the controls and swap or activate items you weren't meaning to, but after a while, it does become second nature. Another major aspect of the game I haven't mentioned yet, but since you're watching video footage, you've probably noticed by now, it's dark. Literally, a big portion of the game takes place in darkness. By far the most important item you have in your arsenal is your lantern, which is going to be one of your 2 items constantly if you're in a dark area. Thematically, the darkness is justified. You're underground, you're restoring power to buildings, but in practice it can be tiresome, especially early on when it's nearly constant. In the second half of the game, you get to experience more lit areas, which is great. You also get to use the lantern on certain enemies or to activate things, and that's neat too. But a lot of things early on are made more difficult in the darkness, and not in a terribly interesting way, just in a way that causes you to miss paths and wander around aimlessly. I don't want to harp on the darkness too much though, none of us want a repeat of the Hell Square monologue, because by the end of the game, it really wasn't something that bothered me anymore. I wish it was just a little less hampering in those early sections, but if you can get through that, there's a real treat of an experience waiting for you on the other side. The combat is satisfying, there are tons of areas to explore, lots of characters with unique dialogue, and again, really creative and entertaining dungeon designs. Nothing on too huge of a scale, but it feels perfectly at home on the Playdate's tiny little screen. The items are all exciting and fun to use, they make really good use of the crank, and like a classic Zelda or Metroidvania game, you're going to see a lot of those little things here and there on the map that you don't know how to get to yet, but you just know you're going to unlock later on. It's filled with great little secrets to find, and there are some really clever Easter eggs. It's just the perfect Playdate game, to be honest. And it's a nice bookend with the Week 1 game Casual Birder, which didn't have combat or dungeons, but definitely took some inspiration from Link's Awakening as well in a different direction. And I want to be clear that Ratcheteer is not just a nostalgia trip. There are modern enhancements here, the map is really useful, the game auto-saves frequently. In spite of its obvious inspiration and influence, it doesn't feel like it's stuck in the past. It feels like what a Link's Awakening style game might be if it were made by a really great team of indie developers today. You know what? That is literally what it is. Ratcheteer is proof that the Playdate can be host to somewhat lengthier experiences. My completion time, getting everything that I could possibly find, I think it's 100%, was around 5 hours. And it also proves that those experiences can be just as good as the types of adventures available on other platforms. This is a gem, destined to be a critical darling indie title, or at least it would be if more people had access to it. Right now, I'm pretty sure it's my favorite game of the entire season. I'm really glad they decided to close with this one because it's a nice experience to go out on. Unless you just hate Zelda games for some reason, I cannot imagine that you won't have a great time with Ratcheteer. And that's it. I have now reviewed all 24 games that were included as part of the Playdate's Season 1 lineup. This week, you got to see B360, a game I've got a real love-hate relationship with, and Ratcheteer, which is weighted much more heavily on the love side of the equation. Overall, I really enjoyed Season 1, and I would recommend picking up a Playdate if any of this stuff seemed at least a little bit intriguing to you once they're widely available. Let me know what you think of B360 and Ratcheteer in the comments. Do you agree that Ratcheteer was a really strong finish? Did you struggle with B360 as much as I did? Or do you have thoughts on the Playdate and the entire Season 1 set of games as a whole? Maybe I'll do a sort of a wrap-up video on the season and my experience with it later on, but for now, that's it. You can find the rest of my reviews of Season 1 elsewhere on the channel, and you can subscribe to see what kinds of other content I manage to come up with later on. Thank you so much if you watched just this video, or if you watched the entire season. That's nice. And again, let me know what you thought in the comments of my opinions, or just what you think about the Playdate. Personally, I like it. I'm Quince. Bye, everybody.